Okay, Philadelphia Fusion. Chat, do you think the Philadelphia Fusion is a super team or just a good team? Boombox and Poker are probably going to be on the bench, so you've got a backline of Alarm and Funny Astro, and then you've got a tank line of Sado and Fury, and then you've got a DPS trio of Carpe, EQO, and Ivy. I think that's somewhere between good and potential super team. I think that's, by default, it should be a good team, and it should be aiming very, very high. Alarm is obviously a big upgrade over Boombox, in my opinion. Funny Astro, I think, is actually a very good up-and-coming player. I think he's going to become a strong main support. Neptuno, you always had that amazing Mercy, but I think Funny Astro edges him out on the Lucio, and the rest of his kit is fairly similar. I see a lot of people saying Sado is the problem. Lilo OW says Sado is absolute donkey shit. I have been the biggest Sado apologist all season. Here's my thought process, though. I'm not just going to spit things into the wild. Here was why I think that Sado was not the problem with Philadelphia Fusion this season. Is that it's so easy to point to one player instead of pointing to a system within the team going wrong. It's when you see a team like Philadelphia Fusion not perform, people always point to one player. Like with Team Canada at this World Cup, people are going to point to Mangachu and Agilities on the main tank and just say, like, that was the reason that they lost. Okay, it might be. But also, there's a whirling dervish of things going on behind the scenes, of which a couple of them, I think, were the problem on Philadelphia Fusion rather than Sado. Sado, when he plays the Winston, especially when they used to have these high ground Winston Goats defenses, Philadelphia were genuinely one of the best teams in the league at being able to pull those off. And Sado's Winston is actually excellent. But some of the time, it looked like he was way too far ahead of the rest of his team and ended up feeding. I think those are communication issues. I don't think those are Sado himself not understanding how to play the tank hero. I think Sado is a very, very capable Winston. I think he's a pretty good Orisa. And I think towards the end of his season, his Reinhardt actually started to look fairly okay as well. I can't remember how good he looked on ball at all. My biggest issue with Sado is that the team would never be synced up with him. And I don't know whether that's Sado's communication issues. Maybe he doesn't talk to his team. But also because the rest of the Philadelphia Fusion was feeding all over the place as well. And like Carpe was going for random flanks, and you had the backline just getting torn into pieces, and they were playing comps that they'd apparently never practiced before, and this kind of stuff, like weird triple DPS kind of stuff. I think that this team didn't have a good system in place this year. They didn't look like they wanted to play together, and they didn't have any coordination at times. I personally believe that if Sado's surrounded by a functioning team unit and they fix their communication issues, I think Sado can look pretty good. Sado was good on Orisa, very good on Orisa, in fact, at the end of 2018. And he was very good on the Winston all throughout 2019. And his Reinhardt play sometimes just looked like he was feeding. But I think that was more to do with the team. But you look at the people that have been implemented around him. Fury is so good. Like, I would say personally the best diva in the world. I would say personally the best off-tank in the world as well. Even though Choyobin exists, I would still say that Fury edges him out on an individual basis. Choyobin obviously is amazing in how he coordinates with the rest of his team and plays within the San Francisco Shock system. But I think Fury, when you look at his skill on Diva and you look at the range of heroes that he can play, and then, fuck it, you throw in the fact that he can also play DPS and main and like Orisa for them in the finals, Fury's outrageous. I think there's a clear top two in terms of off-tanks in the world, and it's Fury and Choyobin, and in my opinion, Fury edges out Choyobin. So that's a world-class player to be playing alongside Sado. The backline's very, very good. Could really make a push for being the best in the world. I don't think they are the best in the world, but I think they could make a push over the course of next season for being in that conversation. And their DPS, Carpe and EQO, can make magic happen. But this season, they didn't at all. When we listened to their comms, EQO was a very good leader for them, but it always seemed like they were winging it. They never seemed prepared going in. And I hope that the changing coaching staff, maybe the players didn't trust the coaches, or maybe the coaches were trying to fix comms so they didn't prep strategy as hard, or I don't know what the issue was. Hopefully with the coaching overhaul on the Philadelphia Fusion and Alarm and Fury coming in to really motivate Carpe to perform, I think this could be a team that, if they don't make playoffs, it's a disastrous season. And they should be pushing semifinals, if not finals. KDG has been a pretty good coach on the Seoul Dynasty. Having said that, though, it's hard to tell with KDG because Seoul didn't have the greatest pieces in the world, and yet they still did relatively well. But they didn't do incredibly well, and you've always got to think, if KDG didn't mess the rosters up by splitting them in half and having an A roster and a B roster, or just two with different types of styles, if instead he had just tried to find the one best roster for Seoul, would they have done better? I don't know. My intuition says that they probably would have done better, but I'm not sure that that's actually the case. Hard to tell. What do I think about Ivy? I think Ivy still has a lot of potential that we haven't seen. Ivy was doing relatively well at the beginning of the season for the Toronto Defiant, but he wasn't doing amazing by any stretch of the imagination. He wasn't a top 5. He might have just squeaked into the top 10 of Zarya's in stage 1. And then, as soon as they lost Stella, as soon as they lost Stella and Ivy had to switch over to Brigitte, it all went very much downhill. But Ivy hasn't really shown his DPS. I don't have enormous amounts of faith in Ivy becoming a superstar DPS player, but he's a good backup to have underneath EQO. The year is 2060. Sado is one of the better main tanks in the league, says Sideshow, as Sado fire strikes a deflecting Genji, killing Boombox and Neptuno for the 3rd time that match. That wasn't Sado feeding, said Sideshow, as Sado charges off the map as Reinhardt. Everyone else is just too hard on Sado, says Sideshow, as Sado accidentally swaps to Soldier, resetting his ult charge. Okay, Sideshow, says the nurse, time for your medication. I mean, like I said, I think that copy pasta, I think I've already read that copy pasta before when I was doing my Visa Hell streams, because people were roasting me for still believing in Sado. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But in my opinion, most of the problems with Sado came down to a dysfunctional team unit. Because most of the reasons he fed was like him going aggressive when his team wasn't ready, or his team goes aggressive and he wasn't ready. These kind of things. Like he would drop from high ground when his team wasn't ready, and this kind of stuff. It's not that he was making the wrong decision. He was making the right decision at the wrong time, which is the wrong decision, right? But it's the timing was the issue, not the decision making that often, which for me indicates that it was the team fucking up. How do you know that that's his fault? There's no way of telling whether that's his fault or not, Jeff. How do you fix it? I mean, I think it comes down to comms and actually having a plan. Of course, it's not always the team. I just think in this scenario, it looked like it was. J-Ronk, I've talked about that a couple of times, but NA talk, Sado is a beast. It's his fault 100%. I mean, you have to wait and see. You have to wait and see for next season. You can never know whether it was his fault or whether his team was calling it and stuff like that. I mean, if someone just is making the wrong decisions all the time, then sure, it's his fault. But if people are doing things at the wrong timing, then that comes down to how the team's coming.